Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Move Smartly Show. Today, we have our monthly Q&A sessions with Davin McMahon. Davin, thank you for joining us once again on the show.
Thank you so much. Fresh off a COVID kick. This will be fun.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Well,
Yeah. I'm getting flashbacks to being on the Marco Polo app
oh,
and making Dalgoma coffees and sourdough, which I didn't do, but
oh
yeah.
my. All right.
Anyway.
Well, we have some good questions. I did take a look at them this month because one of them I had to look into because it was a very deep and interesting question, but some good ones. Thank you all again for sharing your questions. As always, shoot me a note at askjohn@movesmartly.com if you have something that is specific. As you notice, some of these questions are going to be pretty specific. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the details because I don't know all the details, but again, it's something that we can kind of unpack in a little bit more detail. And the idea here isn't necessarily to give someone a concrete answer. I mean, I remember like in the past, I would get comments, kind of people pissed off because I'm not giving a concrete answer. But the reality is, I don't know all the details. Um, it's more about how to approach certain questions, how to think about them, because I don't have obviously everyone's personal circumstances. And like I've said in past shows, some of these questions are about personal preferences and biases and fears and risk and all of that stuff. So there's no right or wrong in every situation. It's more about how to think about them and approach them. And on that note, let's kick off with our first question, Davin.
All right, here we go. Hi, John. Thanks for doing these Q&A sessions. I always learn a lot. Here's our situation. My mom currently lives alone in a fairly large three-bedroom home in the suburbs. It's more space than she needs, and she'll eventually want to downsize. My brother and I both rent in the city, but while we'd like to buy, prices downtown are too high, and we're unsure whether a condo is something we want long term. One idea we've been discussing is buying a 3 unit house together. We'd each have our own apartment, shared access to a backyard, and it would bring our mom closer to us as she gets older. What are your thoughts on this approach? The pros, cons, and anything we should watch out for? Maya.
That's a good question. And I've been getting actually a few more people ask me about this. And this is, there's a few terms for this. I mean, in this particular person's situation, it would be considered multi-generational living, where, different generations of the same household are occupying the same residence in different units. Other people are approaching this from what's called a co-ownership perspective, where two friends, two acquaintances, whatever, their max budget, for example, is 750 or 800,000. They can't really afford a house downtown. They don't want to spend that on a condo, so they pool their money together and buy a $1.5 million duplex, and they each have one unit. So these are alternative buying arrangements that people are kind of coming up with to afford a home of their own. And in this situation, the two people, the kids or the siblings, probably are in that situation where they can afford a condo, maybe can't afford a house. And is this that middle ground? So there's a lot to consider when buying a multiplex or multi-generational living or co-ownership. I mean, personally, I'll start off by prefacing that even though it would be a family purchase, say, like where siblings I always like to approach things as if you were buying with strangers. And by that, I mean, have the details set up, who owns what, who's investing what, structure it like you're not family. I mean, I think it's always the best way to do it. It's fair, it's clear, rather than kind of muddying the waters with kind of these vague arrangements. Now, when it comes to a situation like this, buying a triplex, I'll tell you the challenges with that, to be honest with you, is that most of the triplexes, and a triplex is just a 3 unit home in Toronto, in the city of Toronto, I'd say, because that's what it looks like they're looking at. Most of these are actually originally single family homes that were converted to 3 units. There are relatively few homes that were originally built as triplexes, okay? Where it looks like it was originally designed, has a second stairwell, all of that stuff. Most are converted homes. And unless you're buying in an area like the Annex, which is a pretty expensive area with large homes, most of these units, are a mix of size and layouts. You could have, for example, one big owner's unit on the second and third floor, one bedroom unit on the main floor, and then another one bedroom in the basement. And this is, I'd say, the first problem with these when you're looking at having a family move into it. Number one is finding a unit that everyone likes, and a lot of these old triplexes, one of the units are in the basement, right? And does someone want to live in the basement long term as their principal residence? And I think most people will probably say, not really, actually. I don't really like that. So then, what you would be looking for potentially is, what's called a purpose-built triplex. And this is where, you have, and it'd have to be like a three-story one where there's one unit on the main floor, one on the second, and one on the third, and potentially a vacant basement or a unit in the basement, in which case it'd be a fourplex. They're harder to find. Like I said, you can find them in areas like the Annex, sometimes in Cabbagetown or in High Park. And these are generally pretty big houses because, to have a spacious unit on each floor, in most cases, ideally a two-bedroom, if you're going to be there for a long term, they have to be 1,000 or 1,200 square feet per floor, right? So I'd say it's a hard thing to find, and it's relatively expensive to get three generous, spacious, above ground units, right? Now, one thing I've been contemplating, looking at, and I think where there's a lot of potential, is in building multiplexes. And this has been, as a result of the city of Toronto pushing for multi-unit housing. They legalized fourplexes and in some areas sixplexes. And a lot of the ones that are being built are basically large owners type units. And they typically have very similar layouts. So you'll have one unit in the basement, another one on the first floor, another on the second, another on the third. And they're all like 1,200 square foot, two-bedroom units, pretty similar, right? So they're all very livable. They're all pretty much the same. No one needs to argue over who gets the better unit or who gets the larger unit. And if you do that, there are some positives to doing if you're to build one. Number one is you get a fourplex, which means you're also all now generating income from a basement unit, or maybe you have two units in the basement to make a fiveplex, which is probably even better. You get preferential financing potentially from the CMHC. The CMHC is giving out decent loans at low interest rates to encourage what they're calling purpose-built rent, like rental housing. So part of this construction would be how you structure it, in terms of the legal structure of the home. In theory, you would be building it as like a rental property, and the owners, are the tenants of it, in theory. So there are potentially some benefits to doing that. I think in a future episode, I'm going to try to explore that in more detail because most of the multiplexes that are being built in Toronto are just that, are builders building multiplexes to rent them out to tenants, right? And I think one gap is building them for this situation, whether it's multi-generational ownership or co-ownership among people who can't afford a single family home of their own. You don't want to rent a condo forever, want to have some asset that they're investing in. And I think this is a space that they can do that. So I think maybe in the new year, I'm going to be looking at bringing in people who can shed some more light into this, because I do think there's a lot of opportunity, and certainly multi-generational housing, I think, is probably one of the best ones, or co-ownership, where, again, like I said, units are pretty similar. They're all new, spacious layouts, something that you don't really get in triplexes or fourplexes in Toronto right now, right? I mean, Davin, you kind of have looked at a lot of multiplexes. You kind of agree, like that's kind of one of the challenges that I find with multiplexes right now.
Yeah, I mean, someone's going to get the short end to some degree.
Mhm.
I think there's another sector they can kind of look at, although the pool of which the inventory will be pretty small. But that's more of like a duplex unit, but somebody who's done like a laneway home,
Mhm.
something like that. So I mean, because typically those are going to be of newer quality.
Yeah.
Just be cognizant of the fact that a lot of sellers do overvalue those laneway homes, so make sure
Yeah.
you're actually getting the proper value when you're purchasing it. So that could be something to look at as well. That's not a sort of a typical triplex.
That's actually a good
And
example. You're right.
hmm,
That's actually a
yeah,
very good example because, I mean, and why that's different, why Davin's saying is what different from what I was saying, and he's actually making a very good point. If you buy a duplex, which is like a home with 2 units, you're very likely going to get probably one spacious unit on the main floor and one spacious one on the second, if it's a, pretty generous sized home. And the basement maybe is a rental, or maybe it's storage, or maybe it's whatever. But then the third unit is this laneway home, right? And I do think that is another good potential scenario. Again, I think you're right. There are a few of them because there are a few people selling these homes that have laneway homes, but that is another decent option.
So, John, you said like set it up like a business. What does that mean? What kind of steps you have to do to make sure it's set up in that manner, and how does that protect this family?
No, that's a very good question. So, when we think about how do you set it up as a business, I mean, I think the first thing is thinking about it like a business is number one. How you take ownership is a different matter, and I think this is where I think it's important to, get advice from a lawyer as well and a tax expert to figure that out. Because, if you have three people buying and owning a multiplex, a four or fiveplex, for example, I mean, they could each be partners and each own 1/3 of this entire complex, for example, right? The other way of setting it up is just putting it under a corporation, right? And they all are shareholders of the corporation. If they want to sell it in the future, they just sell the company. So it's a very different. So how you structure it, I think, is, again, you want to talk to a lawyer and you want to talk to an accountant to figure out what the best method is. But beyond that, I think it's important, again, to think about everyone's going to have different motivations and incentives. The mom, for example, let's just to keep things, simple. Everyone's, if you're buying a property that is like 2.4 million, right? And there's three people, each person's proportional share is about 800,000, right? Well, the mom may be paying in cash. She doesn't need a mortgage, right? And then the one sibling has 300,000 or 400,000 in cash to put down. So they, in theory, have a $400,000 mortgage, and the other one has a little bit less. So everyone's proportional share of the mortgage is going to be a little bit different, right? And I think this is where you need to think about that and how to set up your financing so that it accounts for everyone's differences and what everyone wants to pay and is willing to pay as part of the mortgage. And again, on top of that, like I said, if you want to think about it like a company, in the sense that if you have, for example, three units, main, second, and third, and your bottom two are two basement apartments, and you might want to do a fiveplex to get some additional benefits, all three of you are generating income from these two basement units, right? And this revenue will go to offset things like property taxes, heat, whatever it is for the entire building. But whatever's left is, in theory, each person's proportional share of the revenue, if there is any, right? And this is what I mean. It's important to think about it and structure it so that it's very clear what's going on with the finances, the revenue, the expenses, who's responsible for what, and all of that. So again, I mean, I think in the future episode, I'll probably try to bring on some accountants, some lawyers that can kind of give some clarity, because like there's going to be pros and cons with every ownership structure. Even when I have clients buying investment properties, some want to buy them, and investment properties like multiplexes, for example, some will buy them in their personal names, someone will buy them in a small holding company. So everyone has different motivations for doing different approaches. But I think it's important to think about it like a business rather than just we're going in very casually, because this is how, from my experience, how disagreements happen and people get into, family type arguments when things aren't clear and someone feels they're not getting their fair share of the deal and all of that type of stuff. And you want to kill that. When I invest with my siblings, I work with my siblings, everything is kind of black and white. We're all on the same page. There's no gray. And it all makes sense. So I think that's just the way you want to approach it.
Perfect. Okay. I think we can move on to the next one. Question 2. Hi, John. Thanks for these monthly videos. I find them really helpful. I'm looking at buying a condo in Kitchener. where 600 square foot units are generally selling in the 350 to $400,000 range. Over the past 2 weeks, 4 units in a brand new building sold for prices that seem way out of line. All of them are under 600 square feet and sold between 575K and 650K. What could explain prices that high for smaller units in the same market, Steve?
So this one I actually had to look into because obviously it strikes me as a little bit odd. I'm not overly familiar with the Kitchener market. But fortunately, these transactions and some of these sales are actually on the MLS that we use. I mean, and this is getting in the weeds, but Toronto has its own MLS system. Kitchener-Waterloo has its own, and then they don't always, not all listings are on every system, but these particular transactions were on the Toronto system. So kind of unpacking it a little bit, what the viewer is saying is, market prices in Kitchener-Waterloo for these condominiums, at least that they were looking at, were in the, I don't know, 550 a square foot price range. So $550 per square foot price range, which I mean, kind of makes sense. Toronto is 1,000 or just under now. So I would assume Kitchener to be a fair bit below that. But what they're finding is that over the past 2 weeks, there are 4 units that sold for 1,000 or over 1,000 a square foot that are under 600 square feet, which sounds insane. Like that's Toronto prices, if not more than Toronto in some cases, right? In some buildings. So what is happening here? And I'm not specifically not saying the addresses because I don't know for sure what's happening, but I'll tell you what I think is happening. And it really looks like a case of market manipulation. And again, and to unpack what I mean by that, this is a newer building. And I suspect the prices that investors paid for these units pre-construction is way more than market value today. So, appraisers are coming in and basically saying, well, I don't care that this person paid $600,000 for this unit. It's only worth 350 today. So you need to come up with some extra cash to close. There's too big of a difference. It's down 40%. Well, one way to fight that is to kind of come up with these new comparable sales in the same building that are at much higher prices, right? And a few things that make me look like it's manipulated is that in every case, all of these transactions, all these properties that sold were basically double ended by the builder's agent, meaning there's no other buyer agent involved. It's the same agent representing both parties. So what can the builder do? Just basically say, write up a contract that my holding company is going to buy these units at $1,000 a square foot. Write up the contract. It's sold. It's on the MLS, and maybe they have signed paperwork. It doesn't mean that the company or individual, whatever, who bought those units is going to close on them, right? So they could technically be following the process, writing everything down, setting up this fake company to purchase these units, have contracts, have them signed. But again, I suspect these are not arm's length transactions. These purchasers are not, buyers in the free market. Why would the average buyer pay $1,000 a square foot when you can get a similar unit across the street for $600 a square foot or $550? It doesn't make sense. So it's probably happening as the builder saying, we're going to come up with these comparable sales. There was 4 of them, so that now when the appraisers come back and say these units aren't worth what these pre-construction investors paid, we can say, well, here we go. Here's 4 comparables saying they are worth $1,000 a square foot, right? And I suspect this is what is happening. They're trying to, in some ways, manipulate the market to inflate the appraisals to make it easier for the buyers of these condos to actually close on them, because without that, they probably would have a very hard time closing. So again, I think that's what makes one of the things with real estate a little bit tricky. I mean, in market manipulation, it was funny. I was going to do a show on this and talk about it because I was listening to what's his name, Scott Galloway's podcast. Scott Galloway is one of these influencer thinkers who talks about, I mean, pretty much everything, quite frankly. But he was talking about how um, hedge funds in the US were manipulating markets. They were actually doing this exact thing where they would basically go out in communities, buy entire blocks of homes, then sell two or three or four of them to these other companies at inflated prices, reappraise their entire portfolio, refinance its structure, and reset the prices in that market. And again, this is again manipulating the housing market, inflating prices, coming up with new comparables with these holding companies that are probably somewhat related to the parent, obviously, but are simply designed to just inflate prices in their markets. And again, this is one of the reasons why anyone who follows this, I've been a big critic of corporations having too much influence in buying homes in our market. And this is one example, and this US example. And this, again, this market manipulation by what looks like market manipulation by this condo builder and inflating the prices of their units. So again, not ideal, probably something I'll write about, but again, it's hard to I would never write about it and kind of disclose the company because I don't have the details of the contract, but it certainly looks extremely, extremely fishy. And there are a lot of clues that make it look like they're just manipulating the market. No rational buyer's paying $1,000 a square foot when you can get an existing unit for 550
So
across the street.
in short,
Yeah.
there are a couple bad actors at this company who are fabricating MLS sales to trick the bank, the lender, into appraising their condo units for a certain price, so they can close on them.
Yeah, basically they're trying to inflate the market value in that building, right?
Just yeah,
Because again, when appraisers look at comparables, especially for condos, it's not like houses where it's like, they grab condos from any area within a kilometer rate. No, it's always in the same building, right? So they're looking in the same building. So to help this building close and get actually completed and registered, it helps to have these inflated sales at these really, really high prices. So I suspect that that's what's happening.
and it's funny how banks were doing these blanket appraisals, uh, you know, for their own, for their own, I guess, benefit. Yeah, for their own benefit. Uh, but I feel like that was more because they took like a $2 billion problem
Mm-hmm.
and chopped it up into 200, $1 million problems,
Yeah.
like that. But maybe in this case, it's a smaller condo, smaller builder, where the lender is, you know,
And it's a bigger price decline. And just to unpack the blanket appraisals, I mean, in the past, what banks were doing or what they have been doing is if you bought a pre-construction condo for 600 and by the time you took possession, it's only worth five, the bank would technically should be saying, well, we're only going to finance what the condo's worth, not what you pay for it. Cough up an extra $100,000 to come up with a decline, right? They weren't doing that. They just pretended the condos were worth what investors paid for them, right? And as Davin said, why? Because for the most part, the banks were financing the construction on these projects. So they had a very, very big construction loan. They want to get that money back and would rather have, instead of having one big problem, have a bunch of smaller problems, and the smaller ones being the individual investors who have not enough equity in their property. In this case, in these buildings, and again, I think we're going to start to see this in Toronto, the difference between what investors paid and the actual value is starting to get too big for banks just to turn a blind eye, right? So it's easy when the value is down 15 or 20%. Well, in these buildings, it looks like the difference is like 40%, right? So the bank's not going to sit there and turn and say, well, I don't really care about that. I think this is why they're having these issues with these appraisals, and why blanket appraisals may not be helping this building because the difference is too great. I mean, it goes to show you who the heck was paying $1,000 a square foot for pre-construction condos in Kitchener at the peak. I mean, good lord.
well, yeah, using these phantom sales, it makes a case for using closed sales as comparables. But then all your comparables are 2, 3, 4 months old. Like
Yeah.
you can't,
And
you need, when you're doing comparables, you need things that are line up, type,
yeah,
geography, and temporally, time
yeah,
wise.
yeah.
So you can't really do that. Because I mean, honestly, if I wanted to, and if I had no scruples, I could list a house right now, whatever price, and just mark it sold in
Mhm.
2 days.
Yeah.
And who's going to stop me?
Mhm. It's
Who's
true.
going to stop me?
Yeah. It's
Nobody.
true.
So not to like sound alarm bells like this is
Yeah.
happening, because it is exceptionally dangerous to do that for someone's professional career. But I guess in this case, they're doing it. Yeah.
And who's going to audit them now? I mean, Rico, they're, you know what I mean? Like, anyhow, that's a whole other mess.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's your assumption, right?
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Allegedly. All
Exactly.
right. Question 3. Hi, John. I've been following your show and I had a couple questions. I bought a 1-year-old studio condo for my daughter at the peak 2022. Now the value has dropped 29%. I read that pre-construction condos have nearly 5 years of supply. In a recent show, you said the resale supply is about 4.5 months. I feel confused. So, part 1: how can resale supply be 4.5 months and pre-con 5 years? Please clarify.
Okay. So we have to understand what this means, this months of inventory or months of supply means. So months of inventory basically means let's look at all of the units that are on the market right now. Um, and let's just say there's 100 units available for sale, like just to keep the math simple. If 50 sold this month, the months of inventory is 100 divided by 50 or 2 months. If 10 sold, we have 100 divided by 10. So we have 10 months of inventory. So the more, the fewer sales relative to the stock of properties that are available for sale, the higher the months of inventory. So when we look at the resale market, months of inventory for condos is actually more than 4.5. I think 4.5 is for low rise. Condos, I think, is in the sixes. Um, but again, this market is moving and units are selling. Now, the pre-construction market is a whole other animal. I mean, this market probably has, at least in the Toronto area, I don't know, I think last time I checked, close to 20,000 units. And what are these units? Just to be clear, it's not like condos available for sale like in the resale market. Half of those might be pre-construction, meaning if they don't sell, the condo's never going to be built, right? So it's not real inventory. It's potential inventory in the case of pre-construction condos, right? So let's just say you have 10,000 of those. Well, maybe you have another 10,000 of condos that are under construction, but the builder didn't sell. So the builder, when they start construction, might sell 70% of the building, might sell 80% or 90%. Some are going to have some units that they didn't sell that are part of their inventory. So, all of those units, you have maybe 3 or 4 years of construction pipeline. If you sum up all of those unsold inventories, maybe that's another 10,000. And then maybe you have like units that are, or buildings that are completed where the units are sitting there empty and waiting to be sold. And that's, active on the market on the MLS waiting to sell. So those are kind of part of the new construction inventory and part of the resale inventory because they're available for sale on the MLS, right? So yeah, so when we look at why pre-construction inventory or new construction is 5 years, it's because no one's buying houses. If you or no one's buying pre-construction or new construction. If you have like 20,000 units, I don't even know what off the top of my head, like you have hundreds of sales in any given month. You don't have even 1,000 sales of new construction condominiums, right? You have hundreds. So when you only have 300 sales of new construction condos, you have 20,000 units available for sale. Months of inventory is going to go through the roof, and it's going through the roof because no one's buying new condos right now. So that's the big difference between what we're seeing in the new condo market and in the resale market.
Perfect. That makes sense. There's a part 2 here.
All right.
This here. My daughter wants to move to a bigger place in the next 2 to 5 years. Right now, her income is under $40,000. She is trying to move up in her company and wants to improve her income to 50 to 60,000. She has no mortgage on her studio condo. Assuming she achieves her income goal within the next 3 to 5 years, should she buy a larger condo, one bed or 1+1, or should she rent out her studio while renting a larger place? What pros and cons do you think she should consider? Thank you.
Hmm. Again, this is one of these questions where, I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a silver bullet answer. I mean, so let's just ignore the fact that the condo is down in value. We don't know where the value will be 3 or 5 years from now. But at the end of the day, even if the studio condo is still down and the person decides to sell, I mean, the reality is they're going to be getting the 1+den condo at a discount from the peak as well, right? So fine, there's some slight differences, but it's a bit of a wash. So I wouldn't put too much stock in the decline in value because, like I said, you're getting a depressed price on the 1+den. So the bigger question is, should you do it? Now, let's just say on a $50,000 salary, I mean, the most you can qualify, or someone can qualify on a mortgage is maybe $200,000 in debt. So they would be, potentially, again, but if you minus transaction costs, I mean, you're really only going to increase your budget by max 150 or something like that. So if your, studio condo is worth, I don't know, let's just say $500,000 today, it means you're looking at maybe a $650,000 unit. So it's a small increase. Would I do it? I don't know, actually. Like off the top of my head, without giving it too much thought, this one, I mean, I don't know if I do it because if you're doing that, your monthly carrying costs are going to be a fair bit higher, right? You're going to have a $2,000 now. No, you'd be 200,000. Your mortgage would be whatever it is, like $1,000 a month or something like that. You'd have your maintenance fees. Yeah, you'd be a fair bit higher. I mean, do you want to take on this additional debt and carrying costs? Like your alternative is you just rent out the studio, and let's just say net after expenses, you're making $1,000 a month. Well, that thousand goes towards your 2 bedroom rental, which, sorry, 1+den rental, which maybe you're getting for 2,400, you're paying $1,500. I mean, now that I think about it, you're probably a bit of a wash. I mean, financially, it's going to be very close, right? Your carrying costs. And again, I'm just doing kind of mental math, but if you're renting out your studio, making 1,000 net and buying a 1+den condo, or sorry, renting a 1+den condo, you're still going to be paying maybe $1,500 a month out of pocket for that increase. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, for every $100,000 in purchase price, it's about 500
Yeah.
for your mortgage, and then yeah, you add on top your property tax, maintenance fees, that kind of thing. And those are all kind of assumed. So I think yeah, you're pretty on the nose
Pretty
there.
close. I think I would probably still rent because like why go through this change, pay for these transactions if unless you're going to be in the 1+den condo for a
Yeah,
very
long.
long time. I think that's what would be my biggest concern, right? Like, you don't want to be in a situation where you feel like that's too small and now you need a 2 bedroom, right? So I think again, I think my instinct would be probably to rent out the studio, and then rent out another place until you're 100% sure about what your next long-term move is. The numbers are a bit of a wash. Now, the pros and cons, I mean, the cons to doing that is, yeah, you are a landlord. You are dependent on that tenant paying rent. I think for a lot of people, there's of course a lot of anxiety. The landlord tenant board's terrible. What if you get a terrible tenant? What if they don't pay rent? They could be there for a year. I mean, it's 100% true. I think most of that landlords can mitigate, by doing a lot of due diligence, by being very patient about who they let in. You can't obviously have zero risk, but I mean, I've been doing this a very long time. I can't say we've had any situations where, someone doesn't pay rent. Like someone who has good income, a good job, good credit, usually is going to be paying their rent every month. So you want to just be very careful about who you let in. Would be what I would say is kind of the one downside to being sort of a landlord, if you're renting out your studio. Anything
Yeah.
else? What do you think, Davin?
Um. Yeah, I think similarly to you. I mean, the whole like subsidized rent of your current of your next rental is a good idea. Probably because of the unknown of like what are you going to want to live in the medium term future, because to go through the whole rigmarole of selling it again, land transfer tax, that kind of thing. It puts a little hole in the pocket for sure. I mean, the biggest thing, I mean, I know there's no mortgage on the studio, so therefore her down payment is coming from said studio.
Mhm.
The income is pretty low for to gather any kind of like any mortgages, but they don't specify where this is. If we're in like Windsor, Ontario, something like that, it's a different story for condos, that kind of thing. But um, for pros and cons, no, I think you got them both. I think the biggest thing is personal preference. How long can you technically live in the studio if you've just like outgrown it entirely, and you have to do something? At least if you do something now where it's rent the studio and rent your next place, you're not really realizing a loss. Whereas if you're selling now, you're definitely realizing that loss, although you may not gain it in 3 to 5 years. It's a bit of a dice roll, but I don't know. That's a tough one. It's kind of a coin flip, but I think I'd go to the rent the studio and rent the larger place.
Yeah, that's
If
probably. I
we're
can.
talking about capital gains, I mean, if she appraises it now and then appraises it in 3 years when she sells, it's not like that's going to rocket upwards.
No, exactly. I don't even think the decision's about recovering the value. I think that's part secondary. My bigger concern is making this move only to find out the one plus den is, a little small. You need more space for whatever reason. You know what I mean? You got to do this again in 2, 3 years. That would be my primary concern with doing that.
Yeah, it's almost like you're able to test drive the whole situation, which is
Yeah.
which is nice. And I mean, yeah, you'll be selling a tenanted unit at that point, but with a long enough timeline, you may not care too much, right?
Or
And again,
eventually you sell it when the tenant moves out if you want to sell it down the road, right?
sure, yep,
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of take that as it comes. It's true.
Yeah.
All right,
Beautiful.
perfect.
All right.
That's all we have for this session.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for all of your great questions. As always, like I said, if you have your own personal situations, shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com and we'll do our best to answer it next month. We'll see you soon.